cold here.
Tell you what, I can't wait to get my hair cut.
Yeah, I think I'm probably at that point as well, looking at myself in the...
It gets to this, it's quite thick and quite long, and it gets to the stage where I have the hair equivalent of hanger about it. Just crossness constantly.
Just whack it up in a ponytail. Be really, very Melbourne.
I'll be doing something desperate pretty soon.
Don't go to it with a set of clippers, whatever you do.
You have a very good hairline. You should be happy with that.
Yeah, but it's climbing all over me now.
Alrighty, well, we're live. We are live here. I am at the Oak Barrel here on a Thursday night in virtual form. So welcome everybody who is tuning in wherever you may be across the country to another installment of the Oak Barrel's virtual wine tasting we've got tonight. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time that maybe aren't too aware, unfortunately due to proceedings that have occurred this year, our long-loved in-store wine tastings, masterclasses, winemaker masterclasses, spirits tastings, everything like that came to an abrupt halt a little bit earlier in the year. And as such, we have had to try and recreate an Oak Barrel tasting experience here in a virtual platform and bring that experience to you in your lounge room and continue to taste great spirits, great wines, talk to some great people, some very knowledgeable people week after week. And we've had a lot of fun doing so. My name's Joe Perry. I'm the wine buyer here at the Oak Barrel. Have been for the last 3 years or so. Ran many a tasting in the tasting room, and as such, am having an amazing time running virtual tastings on the wine side of things here for the past couple of months. However, I can only talk so much about wines when I am in a virtual room with 3 other people that know definitely more about wine than I do. Which is why tonight I've been looking forward to for a very, very, very long time. The wines here that we've got in front of us, or that you may have in front of you if you're in the Zoom chat, are the wines of Nocturne, fun little winemaking project out of the Margaret River. Super, super exciting. And I think it would have been probably a little bit over 12 months, 14 months ago, I think, when these wines sort of first slid across my tasting desk, and found a home on the Oak Barrel shelves very, very quickly after that. And they've sort of been adored by Oak Barrel customers, whether they've been in store, online. Everyone has sort of offered their amazing, amazing feedback on these wines, which is why when presented with the opportunity to bring in Alana and taste through these wines with some of our good customers and people tuning in across the country, I jumped at the chance. So couldn't do it on my own, which is why tuning in tonight with us as well, we have Harry Seville and Ed Merrison of Cellar Hand Glory, and also Alana Langworthy from the other side of the country, and
where
one half of
times and we have freedom.
Yeah, with way more freedom than Harry and I, and certainly more freedom than Ed. But tonight we have we've sort of put together the brand new sub-regional releases of the Chardonnay and the Cabernets as well, which you all have in front of you at home, and I cannot wait to get stuck in. It's it's got to be the second Western Australian virtual wine tasting we've done in just about a number of weeks, guys, and the booze is getting better and better. I'm very excited, but maybe to you, Alana, before we get into devouring these delicious wines, how did sort of Nocturne come about?
Well, look, Nocturne really started when Jules and I first met. So we were winemakers back in the day in Coonawarra. He was my boss for a very short amount of time. So we were working down there. I was working for Jamison's Run. He was with Wins. And we sort of dabbled on the side with a couple of small parcels of fruit, one being Sauvignon Blanc, the other being Pinot out of Mount Gambier, and made that little project at the time called Fabric Wines. So pretty unsuccessful. No one really wanted to buy either of those varietals from those regions at the time. So it took us a few years to get through that stock. And in the meantime, we'd moved up to Clare Valley for a job that Jules took there with Knapstein. And it wasn't really until we actually moved west, just after our eldest, Harry, was born, that Nocturne sort of came about. And at the time, it was really about expression of some single vineyard sites. You know, we had access to some fruit and some pretty special vineyards that we thought, you know, a nice focus on just with single wines out of those sites was where we wanted to start with the project again. And Nocturne was really born at that point. So that was vintage 2015.
Yeah, and sort of already bringing to the table a wealth of experience on both of your ends at the time. What was it sort of like coming in, you know, with your connections, your knowledge, and sort of setting about what you wanted to do with these vineyards?
Yeah, so really, Jules had access to a lot of these vineyards through his role with Deepwoods. So we'd had an opportunity to watch what was coming out of there and sort of being blended away really into some of the parcels that Deepwoods used. And so spending lots of time during vintage out there looking at these sites and then having the ability to take some small parcels off of them and do some experimentation was sort of the beginning for us. We'd always been very passionate about Cabernet and Chardonnay out of the region, and we just love drinking rosé as well. You know, Bandol's a big focus for what Jules and I really like to drink as a rosé, and having access to a small parcel of Nebbiolo at the time sort of allowed us to go down a path of looking into a West Australian version, if you like. So it was just about those three wines to begin with, and I guess flexing our West Australian winemaking skills, if you like, which, you know, are quite different compared to what you're doing in South Australia. You know, we're very site specific here as a general rule across the region, and about really understanding your clonal material and just, you know, really allowing those sites to speak for themselves rather than interjecting a lot of winemaking godliness technique, if you like. Sometimes standing back and just allowing the wines to make themselves is the hardest thing to do, but actually what you should do.
Yeah, was there, so you're saying that you saw a lot of the grapes coming off the vineyards going into blends and sourcing sort of single sites from that. Was that, you know, you mentioned focus on single sites. Was that kind of uncommon when you started? Were there a lot of people around doing that kind of thing, or would you say you were maybe setting apart from the general winemaking style?
Look, we were probably some of the first to do it with a small brand. You know, I think a lot of the larger companies along the lines of, you know, Devil's Lair, Stella Bella, Deepwoods, all focused on single vineyard for their top wines. But in terms of creating a brand that solely focused on that, we were probably one of the first. Now, coming into that space, I suppose, given Julian was doing a lot of that with Deepwoods at the time, you know, made us realise that that was a good place to focus, and having access to those amazing sites, it all just came together at the right time. And also, I guess, having the guts to just jump in and say, you know, let's give it a shot.
Yeah, and I believe that one quite recently, but also he's, you know, every piece of research I was doing in the lead up just says that he has probably won just about everything there is to win in Australian winemaking. That's a fair point.
I remind him of it very often. Yeah, no, he's had an amazing career, particularly the last sort of 6-7 years, because of that innate understanding of not only the winemaking side of things, but really being passionate and connected with those sites that he works with. You know, right from entry-level wines that he's producing for Deepwoods right through to the, you know, the upper end of what he's doing. He's over everything at all times, and, you know, has a great group of people working with him. You know, you can't do it on your own. And, you know, that relationship between the viticultural side of things as well as the winemaking team, you know, he's done some wonderful things. So very proud of him.
Alana, I was just thinking when you were saying about the starting off a small, you know, a fairly small project like you did, and how that was a little bit different from what was going on with some of the, I suppose, the bigger and very well established names in WA. Just got me wondering. I guess we've always been conscious of, you know, those well established sort of family names around Margaret River. And I don't know whether it's just because I now know, you know, you and Jules and Rob and Jen and others. But is there a feeling in WA that there is a lot more new, young excitement around winemaking there than there was, say, before you guys started Nocturne?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly if you look at our generation of winemakers, we're sort of stepping outside the square here a bit more in terms of being able to have access to some great fruit to begin with, but not being afraid to try different things, try single vineyard, try blends that might not have been a focus of the region previously. And I think there's some really interesting things happening here that's not just dictated by, was it your family, that started the brand, or, you don't have to be pigeonholed into what you're doing. When you look at Margaret River as a region, we're 100 kilometres from north to south. And I think it's our generation of winemakers that are really starting to focus on what that sub-regionality story looks like. Having access to the fruit to be able to do it too, but actually just saying, hey, we can do some really interesting stuff and make it relevant to consumers, because it's the challenge in Western Australia. We all know the names, we can all pronounce the names. On the East Coast, no one knows where the hell Yallingup is or how to pronounce Williabruck. So you have to make the story relatable in terms of the wine style and in terms of the dialogue that we bring across, as well as the winemaker. And I think we're trying to be a bit more relatable to the general consumer now as well, through doing this sort of thing. And wine doesn't have to be this thing that's stuck up there on a pedestal that we all have to talk wank about. It needs to be Tuesday night. What are you going to open? I want to open some Nocturne because I love the story, or, I know where that particular vineyard is and I now know all about it. So, yeah, I think there's some really great things happening, in Margaret River now with our generation, and also with the diversity of labels coming out of the area too.
Yeah, and I know Jules is chairing a wine show, I think, at the moment. But I also know that most the big ticket when it comes to wine shows is getting a gig over there, because not just because it's a nice place, but because it seems to be the most fun. Because there's a lot of young people really getting into the industry and bringing a lot of energy and fun to it as well.
Yeah, and I think also the generation before us allowing a lot of us to come in and do these things. There are still some regions which that hasn't happened as easily. There's still that generation before us that are still tightly holding the reins and not necessarily allowing that next generation to come in and do much trial. It's starting, but we're certainly lucky here that we do have such great access to facilities, fruit, knowledge, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that. That might have actually answered my question, but to go a bit further into it, when you were, approaching, say growers that may have sold fruit to these bigger companies and that sort of thing, and went forward and asked and said, oh, okay, can we take this, and that, or can we use this, and this, and we're going to do this with it? What was the initial reception like? Because I know, like you alluded to, in other regions, it's maybe not as, not as smooth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess we were very lucky in the sense that we'd always had a working relationship with the people who owned the vineyards that we currently work with now. So I guess a lot of those came from Julian and the viticulturalist John Fogarty at Deepwoods, having that one-on-one rapport with those people to begin with, rather than it being, that one step removed that some of the larger companies can have. So it was always an open dialogue discussion with them about wanting to really showcase their site and bringing them into that story as well. And I think, a lot of these sites are very, very small sites anyhow. So for them to say, okay, well, we're willing to sell you the Tassel Park Chardonnay, for example, it's a very, very small site of 4 rows. So when they were selling it beforehand to Deepwoods, it was being blended away into great wine. But to say to them, look, hey, we want to actually make that a standalone wine and tell the story about the site, that dialogue, I guess, was enough for them to say, hey, look, we'd love to give it a shot. And all of it being transparent at the same time with the Deepwoods crew. So I think it's, as long as there's that open dialogue between everybody, people really want to see some interesting wines coming out of their sites, if they're, the viticulturalist or the owner, and for us as the winemaker, being able to do something that's pretty special and unique.
Yeah, it is super exciting. I know, like, I have a lot of fun in the store here selling these wines, kind of as Margaret River, but not typically Margaret River, but probably more Margaret River than a lot of the other wines that are on there. It's sort of the expression of places is quite abundant, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, the drinkers now, compared to what people perceived Margaret River to be, 10, 15 years ago, we've sort of gone a long way away from that, bright yellow, really oaked Chardonnay and Cabernet that was sort of hit and miss, depending on the season. I think there's now a bit more understanding in the consumer base as to what Margaret River kind of is. We're understanding it better as winemakers. And so telling that story, whether it be the well-known larger companies or smaller brands like ours, it's getting out there, it's diverse, and there are lots of stories to tell from within that region.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty exciting. Like you said, it was 100 kilometers north to south, which is not a small place, I wouldn't say. So yeah, a lot to be explored. I'm also just admiring everybody's dinner in the chat there as well. I don't know. It looks like there's some pretty incredible pairings coming up for this one. Is there like any sort of go to what you would eat with the Chardonnay that we're probably about to jump into?
Picture of the picture of the marriage. So in the West, we have freshwater crayfish called marron, which I'm sure most people these days are familiar with. We have a dam on the property where we live, which we have an abundance of them. Not that I said that publicly. But this is actually a picture, I believe, from when you came over to visit Ed with the Cellahan crew.
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't there.
Sorry, you weren't? Oh, sorry. I had
to admire the food from afar.
It's delicious. So this is a typical pairing that a West Australian winemaker would have with their Chardonnay. It's slightly more delicate than having, a crayfish. So it's a little bit sweeter, a bit more delicate, and it really brings out the flavours of Chardonnay, particularly that mineral line, those nectar and stone fruit kind of elements. So this for me is, a great pairing. And I actually really like rabbit and Chardonnay. I'm a bit of a rabbit fan. I know not a lot of people are, but I think that's the gaminess and the freshness are really good together. Yeah, that's what I would choose.
It's probably worth mentioning now, we're going to talk about cheese at some point. Not everyone probably knows that Alana is also a very accomplished cheese, am I using the right term? I was just going to say cheesemaker, that's probably a better way of saying it. But, and with yelling out cheese as well. So I'm sure that everyone wants to hear what they should be pairing it with from the cheese world too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you can't go wrong with Chardonnay and white mold cheeses. And by that, I mean Brie, Camembert, wash rind or surface ripened. When we're pairing cheese and wine, it's very much about understanding the acid balance. So to give you an idea, you wouldn't pair something like a Riesling with that really pronounced acidity with a Brie or a Camembert, because it will have that effect of curdling in your mouth. And it's quite an unpleasant character, whereas you think about that sort of more generous palate that a Chardonnay gives, still with the noticeable acidic profile, but that richness helps balance that rich fattiness of things like Brie and Camembert.
Yeah, I mean everything sounds delicious at the moment.
I know I have none of that in front of me.
Yeah, neither do I.
I don't know why I didn't do that. I have wine.
But on that note, I have just poured a glass, as I'm sure everybody in the chat has a glass as well, of the new 2019 sub-regional Treaton Chardonnay at the moment.
Yeah, I think this is really settled in bottle nicely. Ed will be familiar with this and Harry as well, but quite often we'll look at these wines in the lead up to actually releasing them, and you're looking at them on a month by month basis and seeing how much variation can occur in these wines until the point of release. And for me, I think this is finally, it's really settled into its happy place where everything's in check. The aroma is lifted, it's buoyant, yet the palate is, you know, it's all come together. It's not blocky, it's not acidic, it's really well balanced for me at this point.
So in searching for the sites like we spoke about earlier, what was it that about the Treaton area that sort of drew you to Chardonnay and to sort of make this style of wine?
Yep. So if everyone can see the map that's there on the screen at the moment, Treaton's a funny little pocket. It's the purple pocket where you see it says Kawarramup, sort of in the middle, just above the Margaret River area. So it's actually not near the coast at all. It dips down into a little valley, and it's quite a cold valley down in that section there, planted as part of the expansion zone, really. There was a lot of Cabernet, a lot of Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc planted through there. Cabernet's awful, way too cold to ripen in there. But because of that, the really cool nights that you get through there, and you do get warm days, which help bring that ripeness level that you need into the Chardonnay. And also this beautiful mica flecked soil, which helps radiate a lot of that heat back up into the canopy. So the particular vineyards we work with here, Tassel Park is the original one, which goes into our single vineyard and also the blend that most people are trying tonight. And then there's another one called Grace and White, which is actually basically spitting distance from the Tassel Park vineyard. And it's actually had the same material, the clonal material, taken from the original Tassel Park site and planted on that other site just south. So you're looking at a lot of similarities between the actual fruit itself, but the site variation in terms of aspect and soil composition is such that they actually look quite different, particularly during fermentation. So in terms of what we love about that region is that it gets this effortless minerality and struck match kind of sulfidic funk, which is it's not a contrived sulfide in any way. I don't know how much most people know, but you can incorporate a really stinky, dirty sulfide in fermentation through stressing your yeast through temperature and not feeding it enough. And that will give you that wheat bixy kind of mealy characteristic. Or you can have natural sulfide that is really derived from vineyard and then the natural yeast. So we're tending more towards the latter. We're not adding yeast. We're not doing anything other than temperature management throughout fermentation. So every year, this same sulfide comes out, which is, we don't have to try, which is great. So it is a reflection of those sites.
Would anyone ever do the former method that you spoke about intentionally, or is that kind of
I'm not going to name wineries, but yes, lots.
Okay, right.
I'm not familiar. That really wheat bixy hot characteristic about it, rather than that struck match. I almost liken it sometimes to that green olive juice saline characteristic. But yeah, you don't see it when it's done as a hot ferment.
Yeah, wow, interesting. It I see exactly what you mean on that nose, is that minerality. Struck match is kind of the one that jumps out the most now that you mentioned it, and lots of pure yellow and sort of green fruit that are coming through for me there on the nose.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And, you know, this particular sub-region, because it is significantly cooler, these are always the last vineyards to be picked for Chardy. You know, we're looking at April, mid-April for these vineyards, which if you compare to stuff that's at the north of the Cape, sometimes that can be picked in February. So they are really cold sites, and they can have a bit of disease pressure because you do get a lot of humidity, cold humidity in those sites. So you really do have to look after your canopy management side of things. But, you know, they do have a really interesting selection of natural yeasts that are in there that help, you know, with this aromatic development. And, you know, you just can't replicate that through winemaking application. That is just the vineyard, or vineyards in this case.
So would you guys consider yourself relatively hands-off when the fruit, or in the winery in general? And
Yes. Considered hands-off winemakers. Look, you can't really make wines that are expressive of site or, sub-regions unless you really allow the wine to kind of make itself. Because the minute you start doing things in terms of whether you're adding yeast or whether you're clarifying, whether you're adding things in at any point, you're taking over the aromatic and the palate development of that product. So if you really want to be true to it, you have to stand back and kind of let it take its course, do what it will do. And every vintage is different. Jules is terrible for it. He sits there every day, watches the temperature, the rainfall. Do we pick now? Oh, wait, no, we'll change it. We'll do this. It just freaks out. Really, really good for a winemaker because he's balanced by me, who tells him to shut up, and it's fine. We're the yin to the yang. It makes it work. But yeah, you really do. You have to get your picking right. And so Jules being really OCD about that is a very important part of why these wines are the way they are. And just going in on a daily basis, looking at it, it can turn overnight. So just being really in tune with the site.
I think that's a really good point with the picking, basically the picking and the judgment on the fruit, and how that allows that what you called earlier the careful neglect of the wines, because the balance, and we'll see it again in the Cabernet, is the balance feels so natural in there anyway. I'd imagine that has always had that lovely sense of being massively drinkable because it's got that lovely ripe juicy core to it, but with these lovely cool edges all the way through, and it's actually really hard to stop tasting.
Absolutely.
By which I really mean drinking. But that natural balance, there's such an ease to the wines, and I think that balance of generosity with freshness is just, it's just absolutely hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, it's really special as well. This particular site, the reason Tassel Park in our mind was such a special site when we first started was that, not only did you get this generosity of stone fruits and sulfide and all these things that we loved about Chardonnay, but when you're bringing it in, the acidic profile, you don't have to touch it. So being able to step back and not have to, interject winemaking into the process, it was great. You had this perfect pH-TA balance every year, came in same on same. So to not have to tinker with acidity before you go down the path of fermentation, all that sort of thing, it's just, they're special sites. They really are, to be able to make such a amazing representation of Chardonnay that, you can tell you're in Margaret River, aromatically, palate weight, you're in Margaret River, but that minerality, that cleanness, that lime juice acidity is really special for those sites, I think.
I was going to ask as well, I remember you talking about Tassel Park and how it was very unusual for the interplanting of the Gin clone Chardonnay, which is obviously, which Margaret River is obviously famed for with, I think, 277 clone. And so I don't know if anyone is interested, but just in case they are, because I know that we always do get a couple of questions about clones, I thought it was worth probably pointing out what it is about Gin and Margaret River that seems to be such a recipe for nice, balanced, tasty Chardonnay.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gin's the most widely planted clone in Margaret River, or WA, actually. And it's a really unique Chardonnay bunch in the sense that it has what we call hen and chicken. So you have lots of big berries and then lots of really small berries all in the same bunch. So you can imagine the skin to juice ratio of the small compared to the large is quite different and will affect the amount of acidity, the amount of fruit flavour that comes out of those berries as well. That's quite unique. There's not any other clonal material I can think of that has that same variation, if you like. So really, really tight bunches as well, and really small, the size of the palm of your hand sort of thing. So the amazing thing about it is you get so much fruit generosity, as well as that lovely acid fine line to them as well. So you're thinking of the stone fruit, you don't go down the path of tropical unless you let it hang until it's bright yellow. You know, it tends to lean more towards those fresher, more lifted nectarine, peach, and for me, again, that olive, that savoury element. But then having 277 interplanted, which is actually a sparkling clone, that's where we find a lot of acidic drive coming into that wine as well. So that's a really special part of both of those sites having 277 in there.
Yeah. This is just a question in the chat, actually. You're talking about the coolness of Treason. Juliana, who I think grew up in Perth or around that area, is just asking if the winters are still as cold as she remembers from 20, 30 years ago.
Yep, they're getting colder, I swear. I have a faulty thermostat, but yeah, you go into vineyards in the middle of winter. Thank God I'm not out there pruning. Yeah, really cold, particularly because places like Treat and Cabernets are on the inland side of things. So yeah, being away from the moderating temperatures of the ocean, it gets pretty cold. And houses here are not built for winter. No one has insulation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Ed made a good comment before that you kind of just want to keep tasting / drinking. And yeah, that, like, you alluding to that acidity and the Chardonnay, it really just has that lovely mouth-watering aspect towards it as well. But looking very, very cool.
So for those who have, I guess, interest in how we vinify these wines, they're all hand-picked and whole bunch pressed. So we're super, super gentle. We're not looking for massive volume and extraction. And we prefer the effective puncheons in terms of our oak regime. So we're looking at every year we're bringing in a couple of new puncheons. We then work through the previous vintage ones as well. So there's 1, 2, and 3-year-old in there, just to, I guess we don't want it to be the first thing you taste and the last thing you taste as well, being that oak generosity. So we're looking at quite a small percentage of new oak component there. We're looking for more of the structural and textural element. So puncheon predominantly, and a small amount of barriques just to soak up the excess volume, which we don't really have. And so in terms of what we do, we keep them separate when we're actually fermenting the wines, and then at the end we're doing the blending. So at no stage are we racking these wines off. We're leaving them in barrel post fermentation on gross lees. We're not sulfuring at any stage, because that gross lees contact actually helps to reduce the potential for oxidation. So we just keep a close eye on them, and then we're picking out the eyes of the Tassal Park ferment to go into the single vineyard. And if there's any that don't make the single vineyard, they're added to the component for the Grayson White to make the SR.
Does the winemaking change much vintage to vintage that you've seen at all?
Not really. No. Really, it's the viticultural side of things or the actual picking dates and things like that are changing the most. In terms of when it's coming in and the treatment that we get in the winery, it's exactly the same year on year. We've probably found that we're slightly more gentle in our pressing now. We're taking it over a longer, slower period to what we may have in the very beginning. Now just understanding the fruit a bit better. And not being freaked out by the fact that a lot of the Tassal Park ferment smells like someone farted in the oak barrels. So that's just part of it, and it's fine. Just walk on by. I think the cellar hands have learnt to deal with it too, because it's pretty aromatic.
No, that is awesome. I think as well the second half of tonight's tasting is the SR Cabernets. That we've got as well, the red. But there is a wine that we don't have in front of us tonight that goes sort of in the middle, the rosé, which I believe is getting some amazing response all throughout Australia at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wine that we started just because we love rosé, love drinking it, love Bandol, Provence, love lots of Australian equivalents as well. But when we started Nocturne, rosé was just really starting to hit its straps here as well. But I kind of felt that it was a bit of an afterthought for a lot of producers still. and in Australia it was for a long time as well. You had excess runoff from producing your reds, so we'll just put it into a rosé, that'll be a good home for it. So the fact that we actually sourced this vineyard specifically for the production of a rosé was probably quite unique at the time as well. And being originally 100% Nebbiolo was certainly unique. There's only 3 Nebbiolo vineyards in the whole area. And yeah, we contract out of all 3 now. So yeah, a pretty special wine. It's evolved somewhat since the first incarnation, which was 100% Nebbiolo. Now it's actually Sangiovese dominant with Nebbiolo in there as well. Very small amount of muscat with this particular release as well. So, we did really well with the previous incarnation. Halliday named it his Rosé of the Year in the, there we are, in the Halliday Wine Companion, which was lovely. A really nice recognition of what we're doing, and the fact that it's resonating with so many levels of consumer is great, because certainly when you're making something that is Nebbiolo dominant or Sangiovese dominant, it's a bit different to what a lot of people know rosé as in Australia. You can certainly say that Provence is having its time in the sun for Australian consumers. So, hoping that this sort of wine brings people back into drinking an Australian equivalent at a really reasonable price point, not dissimilar to what you'd be paying, or even slightly less, hopefully a better product than what you're getting out of Provence at the moment.
So, Alana, I just to look at the sub-region for the rosé. So, Cabernets, are the vineyards that you're sourcing from very close to the ocean or a little bit set back?
So, where that intersection that you can see there is, that's Margaret River little township itself.
Right.
So, as you go along the road towards the coast, about, what are you doing? About 5 kilometres in is where you're seeing the Nebbiolo. Whereas the Sangiovese is actually on the eastern side of that highway. So, as the crow flies, you're probably looking at about a 10-kilometre distance to get to Geograph Bay, which is the ocean that you see at the northern end of that map. So whilst you can say, okay, 10 kilometres, that seems like a long way, in terms of influence of the ocean, you are still seeing quite a significant influence. Cabernets as a region is very flat, very fertile, very sandy soil and loam soil through there. So not great in terms of red for table reds. It's too hot. You get really big, ballsy, jammy wines coming out of there. But in terms of bringing it into a rosé realm, it sits perfectly. You're ripening and getting enough fruit at the lower Beaumay levels, but you're also getting tannin ripeness at those levels too. So you're not getting that angular tannin in a rosé, which is not what you want. So Cabernets really, I guess, for a lot of winemakers is kind of where hope goes to die. It was the expansion zone where, no one really thought about what they were planting. They just wanted lots of volume. And I guess we're now realizing that it does serve a purpose in terms of making some really high-end wines. You just need to know the site really well, and it needs to be planted to the right material too.
Are you seeing in other parts of the Margaret River varietals like Nebbiolo and Sangiovese popping up more and more, or making a bit of a rise, or alternate varietals in general?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Particularly in those areas that, the expansion areas, I suppose. There's a lot more experimentation with varietals that suit those microclimates more. So you're not seeing much planting of anything alternate through, Williabra or any of those, or Yallingup even. They tend to be pretty heavily planted to Cabernet Chardonnay. Down south, the Carradale sort of area, it's more clonal variants of Chardonnay, Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc that you're seeing down there rather than alternate varietals. But certainly through Cabernets, Treaton, those sorts of areas, you're seeing some interesting stuff being planted.
I don't want to talk about the rosé for too long, because it's a bit of a tease for people who aren't able to taste it right now. But I thought, just talking about obviously with the Cabernet and the Chardonnay, we've talked about how important that the viticulture really is, and then hopefully not having to do anything at all, but just let it happen. The rosé, obviously, not only do you love drinking it, you guys, but you have actually got a serious track record with both show success and extremely drinkable wines. Presumably, there's obviously the fruit's important, and Nebbiolo obviously and Sangiovese great grapes for rosé, which I guess you could probably tell us why that is. But also, I guess there's a little bit more judgment as well involved in just getting the tone right the way through the wine. So what's the skill? What's the trick there?
Look, I guess when the fruit's coming in, temperature control is really important from your vineyard into the winery. Particularly if you're picking, on some pretty hot days in February, March, and it can only be like a 20-minute drive from the vineyard into the winery, and you can pick up some serious temperature in your fruit, which translates into the final wine. If you're really looking to maintain a lot of that refined character and that purity of fruit, you can lose it pretty quickly in allowing your fruit to get too hot. So we're pretty hot on making sure that the fruit is cold before it hits press at all. So if we're finding that, it's a hot day, it's going straight into the temperature controlled room and bringing it right down to 4 degrees before it goes anywhere near the press. And also whole bunch is really important as well. Keeping those berries intact, no oxidization of any juice that happens to, come out of the fruit when you're picking. So for those who don't know, you can machine pick or machine harvest your fruit into bins. So basically the harvester shakes the living daylights out of the vine. All the fruit goes into the harvester and then goes into picking bins, sort of 1-2 ton picking bins. And then the weight of the fruit itself can actually allow a lot of the juice to come out of the fruit. And the longer that's exposed before hitting the winery, you lead to oxidation problems if you're not, really looking after the fruit. Whereas whole bunch picking, you maintain the integrity of the bunch, and so there's a lot less fluid loss at the vineyard site itself. So you can control that oxidization to a much greater level. So that's really, really important, that hand-picked and temperature control, and then gently, when we're pressing, again, like the Chardonnay, really slow, really looking at taking only the best cut, the free run cut. We don't do anything with the pressings component. And then the oak, it ferments in old oak for the textural component. So you're getting a lot of texture already from the tannins and that Nebbiolo component, but that oak really helps to, I guess, give a bit more direction to that as well. So we want crunchy phenolics texture to balance out, the really pretty lifted perfume that this particular wine has.
Quick one, would a straight Nebbiolo be on the cards for a red wine?
I don't think so. So therefore, no. Look, Nebbiolo that's planted in Margs is predominantly for rosé, just because of the tannin ripeness issue. Here we are moderated very heavily by the two oceans. So it's not a warm, hot climate area, really. And so if you had a warm vintage, for example, you would ripen your tannins. It would be, quite an interesting wine to look at. But if you're having a cool vintage like last year, I think you'd struggle and you'd err on the side of greenness and really, really phenolic examples. I just think it'd be awful. So
I guess it's not enough Nebbiolo to do it, really, is there?
Yeah, no, there's only 3 vineyards, and I don't know of any others that are being planted at the moment. So there's not enough to service this particular wine even.
Yeah.
So if anyone thinks they're going to come in and take our fruit source from underneath us, they'll have me to deal with. And I'm really serious.
I just poured a glass of the Cabernets, diving into, and just on the nose already, it's very aromatic. Yeah, like I said when I sort of first poured it out of the bottle at the start, really lifted, really energetic as well. Really enjoying this wine.
Yeah, it has an amazing vibrancy about this particular wine. So you know, Cabernet is king, and Julian likes to remind everyone that he is the king of Cabernet. It's a varietal that's always been close to our heart. You know, if you look at the regions that we've worked in, Coonawarra, Clare, Margaret River, you can see that we've done a lot of Cabernet producing in our time. So this is the grape varietal. If you look at Chardonnay, you could almost say Chardonnay is the winemaker's grape varietal, in that so much winemaking can be applied. Even though we don't, we stand back. It's the one that winemakers can interject as much of their own personality as they like through, you know, monitoring and changing yeast, what you add, the oak, malolactic fermentation, all that sort of thing. Whereas Cabernet really is more about having the right site. So we fell in love with the She Oak Vineyard, which is the dominant component to this particular wine. And if Ed would like to bring up the map up, you can see we sit right up, we're up in the northern end, so in the Yallingup subregion, which is the most heavily moderated, if you like, by oceans, because you've got two oceans close by. You've got the Indian Ocean as well as Geograph Bay. So it's wonderful in that you've got the warmth and the heat to ripen the fruit to the level we want for these wines, but you're not getting super, super hot conditions because you've constantly got that airflow off the ocean. So it allows you to produce these mid-bodied, but really expressive wines, which is a pretty special thing. Oh, and map, we have to show the map. Where's the map?
Oh.
Ed, map. Yeah, all you're seeing is a picture of me and Jules. Sorry, that is actually the She Oak Vineyard itself that was in the background.
I'll get the right one here. Hang on.
And a good-looking cheese board in front there, I noticed as well.
That's right. Yeah. I reckon Jappy ate most of that cheese board, actually, putting it out there. So
have I got the right screen?
What was that?
Have I got the right screen?
You do have the right
See
screen.
it now.
So you'll see our little flag there where it says Nocturne Wines. So we're sort of almost halfway there, really, between Geograph Bay and the open ocean. So the valley itself runs from the open ocean through our vineyard almost. So the vineyard itself faces south, and the gully at the bottom is where you're getting that airflow through off the ocean. Now, the unique thing about this wine is it also has Merlot, which comes from the vineyard immediately opposite the She Oak Vineyard. So ours faces south, theirs faces north. So we take Merlot out of that vineyard. So that's all within that same little unique pocket of the Yallingup Hills. And then a very small percentage of Malbec comes out of the Deepwoods Vineyard, just to add some sort of that pastille, juby blue fruit, if you like, to the wine. So it gives some mid-palate plushness. And look, there it is. There's the vineyard. You can see actually from the Nocturne Vineyard, you can see the vineyard directly on the other side of that lake. That's where the Merlot is. So really, really close by. You can see all of the water surrounding us. We've got lakes on, you know, on the property itself. We've got the two dams, the big lake at the bottom between us and the Simpson Vineyard that we have the Merlot from. And where that sort of green patch is, where the arrow is sitting on top of, is actually a big lake. So plenty of water around.
I certainly think there'd be a lot of winemakers over this side of the country that'd be very jealous of those lakes and water reserves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something we really have to worry about, which is lovely. And I say that as a very broad stroke thing to say, but you know, the last time we had a really, really, really dry summer and vintage was back in 11 when we first moved over. And I remember thinking the region was just crisp. It was super dry. But no, we're very, very fortunate to have a decent rainfall here. And it's been a very good winter here too. Lots of full dams.
So what in this particular blend or this makeup, what was it about those sites that stood out particularly for the varietals?
So the unique thing about the She Oak Vineyard itself is the clonal material is actually you wouldn't say that well suited to the Margaret River region. It works because it's in the Yallingup area, which is the warmest sub-region. It's actually clonal material out of Coonawarra. So it's a 126 clone, which here, often it doesn't get warm enough to ripen its tannins, and it can err on the side of that really peppermint bay leaf kind of character. Whereas that site, because it is moderated so heavily by the ocean, we've got enough sunlight hours to ripen it, but it doesn't get to that jammy level. You know, it still has that really refined claret sort of style about it. And again, it's quite late in the piece in terms of picking for that sub-region. But it's just effortless. You know, you just sit there and you watch it, and it just goes quite happily through its bome maze. It develops tannin ripeness really easily and fruit generosity. Ever since, you know, we first laid eyes on it, it's been consistent year in, year out. It's just a beautiful site. It's really special.
Are you the only ones to use that clone in Margaret River?
No, there's a few other,
popular. Yeah.
a lot of vineyards that were planted at that time had 126. There's a few in the Deepwoods portfolio that have it. There's some a little bit further south. Lots of it got ripped out or grafted across to other clones.
There is like a Coonawarra thing about, I think Juliana said it, there's like that minty, quite fresh and vibrant character to the Cabernet that you could almost err on the side of Coonawarra if you're in a
now, let's not be rash. I think I think it was Gary Walsh's tasting notes that it was like someone had brushed past you wearing Danker rub and just left a whiff. I'll go with that. I thought it was quite good. No, I know what you mean. It has a plushness about it that sort of you would see in probably cooler years out of Coonawarra. You know, it has the structure as well and the generosity, despite the fact that it's mid-bodied. But yeah, it does have that eucalypt character to it.
I guess also the fact that a lot of the Cabernets that we do see from Margaret River are one style.
Correct.
They're not necessarily have the provenance that this does. They're just, that's how we make Cabernet. That's what the market wants. They want big, aggressive, overly kind of opulent. Well, that's more that Danker rub like style, and it works. It's Margaret River Cabernet without, not as we know it kind of thing.
And I think too, the amazing thing about Cabernet from Margs for me is that tannin structure and ripeness, despite the fact that it is still medium bodied. You know, you're not needing to get these really high bomes, high alcohol to get that fruit generosity and balance of tannin, which is a pretty special thing to have. And it really is to do with, you know, the topography of the region.
Dave actually just asked in the chat, he says the Cabernet is excellent. He also says, understood that there's a bit of Merlot and Malbec, but is there also Cab Franc in the mix? No, so no Cab Franc.
I would suggest so, but no. No, I blame Julian for that a lot of the time. He does soak up a lot of the Cabernet Franc for Deepwood stuff. But, you know, I think we do all the blending, you know, we bring them all out of barrel and do the blending, and then the final wine goes to bottle. And we did tinker with possibly using a part barrel of Cab Franc that was available from the Deepwood stable. But it stuck out like a sore thumb, whereas the Malbec just sort of, it slid in there. It had that slippery slinkiness about it, which just worked with the tannins of the Cabernet. You know, you're looking for effortless balance rather than being able to say, hey, you've got those three varietals in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I see really, really good balance in this wine as well.
Yeah, that black olive cassis, eucalypt, but still that pastille fruit for me is what makes it so drinkable now, yet you know you could put it aside for a while if you really, really wanted to. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it now.
Yeah, it's good. I think your point about the fruit generosity is spot on. A little bit like the with the Chardonnay, it's got all those lovely bits around the edges, all those that, you know, that dusting of tannin, the lovely, you know, there's a really nice leafiness to it, which I think is probably where that Cabernet Franc comes from. And I mean that genuinely. I really love that character when it's not over exaggerated. It's just a little bit of seasoning on there. But in the middle of that wine, it's just lovely flesh. I mean, there's no, and I think that's often the case in Margaret River. I think is one of the advantages, as you say, that fruit generosity, because it balances everything else so nicely to have a generous mouthful, and it makes it so moorish as well. And it actually does make the prospect of drinking Cabernet not in a strict manner, but actually drinking it for enjoyment, rather than having to pair it with a certain kind of food at a certain kind of time. You can actually drink it as a drink and really love it.
Exactly. And that's what I guess Jules and I have always been really focused on as well. We want it to be your Tuesday night wine with pizza, or, you know, even not with food if you don't want to. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, the focal wine and, you know, the wine that comes at the end of the meal to, you know, look at and go into lots of complexity about. It can just be your Tuesday night pizza wine and be really enjoyable. And yeah, I love the versatility of Cabernet. Not a lot of people maybe would have put those two things in the same sentence going back 5-10 years.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of that matching, with that ragu, the ravioli with smoked sausage and tomato sound, you know, wouldn't be for every Cabernet, but absolutely can imagine it being magic. And I gather whoever was cooking that is enjoying it.
Can you send some west? It's almost dinner time. It'll probably get here.
Juliana actually put in the chat there and said, have you actually used heavier bottles, or is it just her? And Ed has also just come in and answered Dave's question about the percentage blend of the three varietals.
Yeah, sorry, I did it in a rather boring way, sorry.
Well.
So what you'll see with the bottles, can you see the different size cap? So this is slightly smaller than the Cabernet. The aim is to go all to this slightly larger format of neck, and the bottle itself needs slightly more glass in it to actually justify that extra size in the pouring space. So yes, you are correct. It is a slightly heavier bottle, just because we're going more towards that size. We just think it looks better. It's a bit more contemporary with the labels as well. So yes, it is a bit heavier.
Speaking of the labels, I think there should be credit where credit's due, because I think that they're great, and we're talking about the wines were released at on the 1st of September, and I have noticed that a lot of the somms around Melbourne and Sydney have been posting more bottles of Nocturne than anything else at the moment, because obviously they like them. But who's the artist, and how did it all come about?
So originally, with the Tassel Park and the She Oak single vineyard wines, I've always been a big lover of contemporary art. So Lynn Urbai is the lady who did the original artwork that we had for Nocturne. And then from there, when we looked to incorporate an SR range, we toyed with so many different ideas, whether it was to step completely away from the art as a label and do something, a bit more stylized and maybe, specific to the vineyard sites, that sort of thing. And it came back to just loving Gabriel. God, I just had a mental blank as to what her surname is. It'll come to me afterwards. She's a contemporary artist out of Germany, and we'd followed her on Instagram for a long time, and we came across two labels. So it was actually these two here, these paintings, and loved both of those, but couldn't find anything in her portfolio for the third wine. So she actually painted that one for us. So yeah, really it was, we felt that the simplicity of them reflected what we were trying to do with the winemaking and these wines as well. And it also kept it within the stable of the labels that we already had for the SV. Gabriel Herzog, that's her name. Yay. Sorry, Gabriel, if you're tuning in. So yeah, and I think the nice thing about using art as a label is that everybody sees something different. There's an argument as to, what that is. There's about 20 different descriptions I've heard. Even that, which is pretty simple. There's a lot of conjecture as to what that is.
What is that for you?
For me, it's a set of lips.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And, orbits, Saturn, who knows? But I love that. I love it. It's a talking point before you even get to the wine.
Something interesting I did just notice going back to Dave's question there was, which Ed answered with 53% Cabernet, 35% Merlot, 12% Malbec. He actually said, assume the Cabernet is 85% plus, which I think might sort of allude to how well balanced this is, and maybe really showcases the Cabernet fruit, but also that drinkability that we were touching on earlier really shines, which I thought that was quite interesting. And
also the validity of the Merlot in there as well, in quite a high percentage. I think a lot of the time people are used to seeing Merlot in that 10 to 12% sort of ratio, but that site, that Simpson Estate Merlot really does develop some beautiful, very pretty elements to it. I think for a long time Merlot just was a bit of an afterthought in terms of the way it was vinified, the viticultural side of things, and there was always a lot of green kind of undergrowth character in a lot of the Merlot from over here. Whereas this site, it's beautiful. It really is a joy to work with. It's the most aromatic Merlot through ferment. Its tannins are soft, supple. It fits so well with the Cabernet. Now, you could argue they're neighbours, so it probably works in terms of, they're growing together essentially, so it should work. But that's not always the case, even though there's sort of 500 metres between the two sites. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with that vineyard going forward as well. They're doing a bit of expansion work in there and replanting some Shiraz across into Cabernet as well.
Does the Merlot ripen a fair bit before the Cabernet?
It does. Yep. So that comes off, when did that come off? About 3 weeks beforehand from memory. And Merlot can be quite big in terms of its berries. It can be quite generous and quite pulpy, but this particular site's not so much like that. They're slightly smaller, a bit more skin to flesh ratio. So when you're going through ferment, it does pick up a lot of color early, which is not always the case for Merlot in ferment. And just an effortless ferment as well. It didn't race, didn't get too hot. It was just a nice, steady 5-week proposition. And again, all wild, no ads.
The one thing, and actually on how your comments on the Merlot there, it seems like you've definitely, knocked Chardonnay, Rosé, and Cabernet blend absolutely out of the park. Is there anything that you'd see yourself working with coming into the future, or anything you've got your eyes on that you can tell us about?
We haven't really looked into expanding the range any further. I think realistically, that's probably all we'd want to explore from here in terms of what Margaret River means to us in terms of wine. We had toyed with the idea of potentially doing an overseas wine, something out of Sicily or something along those lines.
Yeah, okay.
How that's going to work, or if that could ever work in the current world climate, who knows? But no, I think for the moment, just focusing on, the two tiers as well, and giving the SR, its own voice, and really exploring that going forward. This is only the second release for the SR wines, and already you can see, how much we've developed it really in the space of one vintage. I think it really has its own voice this year compared to last year's. These wines stand alone. They have a relevance within our portfolio a bit more.
Dave just put into the chat Nerello Mascalese, which is, if you were to take anything out of Sicily or make anything in Sicily, what would that be?
So really, for us, again, it would have to be site specific. We'd have to go in and look at a vineyard and go, yep, we love this. So I actually don't know if I can answer that at this point, because I think I just need to be there and be at one with the vineyard. So lots of different options. And, it's certainly in vogue at the moment, Sicily. So, whether there's an element of that in my mind at the moment, because we do drink quite a bit of stuff out of there, whether actually going and being there, it would have as much romance for me as it currently does. We've always toyed with the idea of, Burgundy as well, but that's probably a pipe dream. So, yeah.
I was just gonna say, just because I wasn't, it may have been explicit, but in case it wasn't, that Alana alluded to the rest of the range and the tiers. So obviously that we're looking at the three sub-regional wines that were released for the first time last year, and this is the second coming of the SR sub-regional wines. But the single vineyard wines, which is the She Oak Vineyard Cabernet and the Tassel Park Chardonnay, is the top tier, the SVs, which are out at the beginning of February, all going well, I think.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I actually had a look at them the other day, just for shits and giggles, and yeah, they're tracking beautifully.
Happy?
Yep, very happy. You know, it's not sort of the same. Last year, Jules and I had huge arguments about the blending of the Chardonnay. This particular release, we didn't have any arguments, but I would almost say that aromatically, it's as out there as the previous incarnation. So whether Julian has just, you know, come into my realm and realized that I was actually right, or you know, whether we're all just becoming more accustomed to that that kind of aromatic in our wine, who knows? But yeah, they're really expressive. You know, great vintage, 19. So yeah, some really exciting wines to look at when they get released.
And just on that point about great vintages, because you have talked or again alluded to the conditions there.
We don't have bad vintages.
Exactly. Well, it's not just it's not just luck. It really is quite incredible looking at the rest of Australia. What an amazing run Margaret River's had. So I guess you just thank your lucky stars that you're there.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, that whole, I guess, the moderating element that the ocean has here, but also that whole talk that we're having about site selection, clonal material, and actually really understanding what to produce from specific sites to get that repeatability or, you know, consistency, should I say, from vintage to vintage. So, you know, there's a lot of things, I suppose, that you can say, oh, you know, thank God, Mother Nature on our side, but there is a lot of human interjection, I suppose, there that has allowed us to produce a lot of really, really stellar vintages for a while now. We're all God, basically, you know.
We've got another question in the chat there. What are the recommendations for wineries and wines from Margaret River?
Really depends on what you want. So some interesting stuff coming out of Stella Bella at the moment. Luke Jolliffe's doing some great stuff down there, really surrounding understanding what's happening in the south. You know, it's very different to what we do up here. So trying to produce things that reflect, you know, their sites down south. So some really cool Chardonnay coming out of there particularly. Love what he's doing with the Luminosa range as well. Rob and Jen Mann with Carimbia, who are also with Cellarhand. Their stuff's just effortless, ethereal. They're wonderful people. So, you know, for me, a lot of it is to do with how much I just adore the people as well, because it's so much part of their story and a lot of people's stories. Wines of Merit actually are doing some really cool stuff. Sarah and Nick James Martin, really, really small little kind of alternate, you know, minimal intervention wines. They do Chenin, Cab Franc. They've got a Shiraz coming out as well. So they're doing some interesting stuff. Can't go past what Jenny's doing either at Bas Felix. You know, she's just an enigma. I love Jenny, love her wines. So they're four that I'd probably look to at the moment. And of course, Deepwoods, you know, always producing a really diverse portfolio. You know, there's something for everybody, and they've really nailed their vineyard selections, their viticulture. So it kind of makes the winemaking side of things a bit more effortless, if you like. Not to take anything away from Jules. But
no, but as you say, really understanding the area really, really well and being able to look at it and just see what it does best, or what each bit does best is just, you know, it's just such a great perspective to take in the first place, I guess. And it's clearly not being wasted going by these wines.
So yeah, no, there's lots of really great things happening here. And actually Xanadu is probably another one I'd add in there. You know, Glenn is an awesome guy producing some great stuff. He's got a side label, La Kooky, which do some really fun wines as well. His rosé is excellent. actually done with Pinot, believe it or not. So quite a different style to what we do, but really interesting nonetheless. So yeah, lots of cool stuff. And not necessarily all of these places have cellar door options. You kind of have to look in really good bottle shops for some of these wines, but that's kind of the fun these days as well. You know, particularly with travel restrictions, particularly coming to the West, you know, just got to head to really good bottle shops. Oak Barrel, you probably have all of what I've just listed, I'm sure.
I think there's actually another me over that way that's doing some very good things with Dormalona as well.
Yeah.
Which we
absolutely.
Yeah.
So Jo was she was the original, I guess, voice for minimal intervention wines. And she's been doing some great things and really, I guess, educating people about non-intervention, low intervention wines. So there's lots of arguments you can take, I guess, surrounding natural wine, which is a whole nother game entirely. And Ed will know I can go on about this for hours. But, you know, most of us realistically are natural winemakers. We're not doing a whole hell of a lot with these wines in terms of, you know, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point. I think that's probably the salient point from the whole discussion. You described the vinification. You said, for those who are interested in how these wines are made, well, they're not really.
Yeah.
They're grown and then hopefully left alone, and they turn out really nicely balanced because they were grown
they're natural,
well. They're
not faulty. Two different things.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. Otherwise, I'll go on for hours. So yeah, no, it's a really good, really special time here, and it's lovely that we have the ability to, you know, talk about it on this sort of level, or even throughout bottle shops, everyone having that same understanding as to this evolution of Margaret River and its producers as well.
Yeah, definitely feels that way from even what we're seeing here over on the East Coast. There's a lot of excitement around it, which is really, really cool.
Yep. Absolutely. And we get caught up in our own dialogue over here because, you know, we're so far away from everybody. So everyone loves WA and WA. So it's nice to actually hear the perspective of people on the East Coast and, you know, how they view what we're doing, and also what they think of, you know, all this talk we're having about single vineyards and sub-regionality, because of course we get it, but, you know, how is it translated to the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. But no, these have been amazing. I mean, my last two questions were 2020 vintage and what's coming up, which I think have both been answered.
2020 vintage.
Yeah.
Fun. Fun for winemakers everywhere in WA, but not for anyone anywhere else.
No.
Look, tonnages were quite low this year, but again, we had a really moderate vintage, really, in terms of temperatures. It was warmer than last year, but certainly not in the realm of a hot vintage at all. You know, we were still picking quite late for some of these wines. So, you know, into April for Chardonnay. So, you know, I think as a whole, we would say it's probably along the lines of 18 in terms of quality levels. So we're really happy with how things are looking at this point.
Have you used the same two vineyards for your next Chardonnay?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, so that'll give some continuity to it. So you'll be able to really reflect on those two wines next door to each other, if there's any left. We've actually kept a museum aside. You'd be very proud.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed. I'm surprised it doesn't get drunk.
No, I actually took a photo the other day because then I sent it to Jules saying, I know exactly what's there. If you take any, you're in strife.
Do you often drink older vintages of your wines, or going back to sort of when you first started?
We're just starting to now with some of the original ones. I think we probably got a bit excited early on and drank a little bit too much of, you know, 1 and 2 year old vintages sort of thing, whereas we probably needed to leave more aside so that we could reflect on them now. So the museum regime is somewhat improved, let's say. So yes, we should start even trying to source some if there is any. Probably Rob and Jen actually have a much better cellar of all our old wines than we do. So we might just go down there for dinner.
No,
Yeah,
it's
well,
just-
I think we made the comment actually last time though that the last time we spoke that Dave made the comment that going back to Coonawarra they enjoy the wines, but typically more with age, whereas so these wines are drinking so beautifully now. But I mean that's the danger sometimes, isn't it? That they're drinking so beautifully on release that they're not going to last.
No,
And actually, Nocturne wines doesn't have a great track record of actually lasting till the next vintage.
no, it's exactly
It's
right.
never made it before. So
There was a little bit of rosé, interestingly, left when the Halliday Award came out, and I think what was that, 2.5 minutes or something that lasted.
that day.
So yeah, no, it's a lovely position to be in. There are challenges surrounding not being able to produce enough for you, but that's part and parcel of being dictated by your vineyard.
Dave actually does ask a good question and says, can I ask about Margaret River and climate change? It strikes me that the proximity to the ocean might help, but would be good to have Alana's perspective.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with that. We are kind of buffered in a lot of ways to the extremes, I guess, of climate change. So that, that increase in temperature and those, really, really cold nights that can often, happen at the same time. So the diurnal variation is not happening the same way it is in other regions that are more inland or in other states. And so, yes, it is a problem still. We are still seeing change, but I think it will take a lot longer than other regions really for it to have an effect on wine style, if you like. It's still bloody cold down in Carradale. It's going to take a long time for that place to get hot.
Well, yeah, I got to say, pretty blown away by these two wines that we've had tonight, as I'm sure most people in the chat are. So it's been awesome. Like I said, I was very, very excited to put this one together since I first tried these wines. And then when Harry showed me the new vintages the other day, so it's been amazing to put this together and get your wealth of knowledge, Alana. So thank you so much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, and I hope everyone really enjoys the wines. And yeah, I'm very jealous of what everyone's eating right now. So make myself something interesting.
Yeah, and also a huge thanks to obviously Harry and Ed again for making this all happen, making my job very easy. I just get to sit here and chat away, which is good. And
Cheers,
again, it doesn't really happen without a crowd of people watching along as well, who have made these tastings work. Every single time, which has been amazing. So I hope everybody's enjoying tuning in and drinking the wines as well. So we're looking forward to bringing heaps more in the future.
And just a quick thank you to the names that we keep seeing on each of these. That we really appreciate the continued support. We know we see your names, we see you on each of these, and we really appreciate that continued support.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a fan club now, it seems.
Definitely.
Awesome, guys. Well, I'm going to sign us all out.
Cool.
And go and share the rest of these bottles with my team out the front there.
Excellent. I promised the in-laws tonight.
Yeah.
They've got right now, so I said, don't worry, I'll bring wine.
All right. Cheers, Joe.
All right.
Cheers, Lana.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.